All right. So just getting started here. Give it a few minutes for everybody to come on in and so I can get myself organized here. If you joined through Google Meet, then you are automatically muted. So can't hear you, but just wanted to keep the distractions down to a minimum. Do feel free to comment in the YouTube live stream chat. That is where I'm streaming right now. All right. So, welcome everybody. Please do feel free to uh, write questions in the chat. I'm trying to keep the distractions down to a minimum. This is also a recorded event, so I really hope that you guys will take a lot away from this and that everybody else that wasn't able to make it here will be included. So like I said, there is a Google Meet in the Facebook event. You can follow that link and that will take you to the Google Meet so that you can join the QA session later. If you have a question, you can either type it in chat or you can ask or you can raise your hand in Google Meet. So that's about it. Also, if there's any technical difficulties, if the volume's weird, please let me know. This is a pretty new setup for me, so hoping that everything will go well. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Yes, there's a little bit of humor in here. Okay. So my name's Ian Brubaker. I've been a hang glider pilot for about 10 years now. I have also been in aviation for, well, since I was 12. Had a lot of experience around aviation and a lot of time to observe everybody through videos, through flying with them that I was able to gather a lot of information from, make my own landings better, and also was very fortunate to have very, very good teachers. Um, Greg DeWolf was my primary instructor, along with Joe Greblo and Andy Beam. And between the two, I think I did get the best of both worlds, and I'm very fortunate to have that and thankful that I'm able to share it with all of you guys. Um, Also, just to add to the um, uh, my resume, so to speak, uh, the number of these that I have broken is exactly two in 10 years of flying. So um, if that's my one time that I get to show off a little bit because I'm going to be talking about landings, so hopefully it gives me a little bit more credibility there. All right, so let's get started. We're going to talk about some primary principles here, even though I'll be going into a lot of detail. I want everybody to try and focus on whatever I'm saying to listen to it in the context of these four main principles. The first one is planning. How well are you setting up your approach? What do you are you evaluating the conditions throughout your landing? Have you chosen a landing zone, or is it a surprise that you didn't anticipate to land in? So all of these things will come into not the landing technique, but how much you're giving yourself the time to process a stressful landing. We can only hold so much information. We can only, deal with so much amount of stress. So if at the time that we need to flare, we're still thinking about not hitting a rock, then it's probably not going to be a good landing. Glider attitude, primarily meaning that the wings are level, or what some might say, especially for those in the Bay Area crowd, wings balanced. And balanced in the sense that they remain uh, level throughout your flare, and that you can maintain the wings from hitting the ground unless it's at the last moment, just as you see in the picture here, Wolfie sticking one of the wingtips in the ground. Well, at some point, gravity is going to take over. It's kind of inevitable. Um, but really, our ideal landing is just to have that keel hit the ground or our feet hit the ground and bring the glider to a stop very gently. The third principle is glider feedback, and I say this in the sense of having response or being sensitive to what the glider is telling you. What are the inputs that you are feeling from the glider? But also, um, well, that's primarily it. To me, there's only one instrument on your glider, and that's bar pressure. You can equate that to airspeed, but it's all, if you were to take everything away from your glider, all the instrument pods and everything, which many people fly without, uh, that is all you have left. You could use sound, which is actually more appropriate than ground reference, but trying to have that kind of feedback and be receptive to that. So we'll go into some details on uh, techniques that would be conducive to those three principles. And then the last being technique itself, which we'll cover in more detail throughout this video. Okay, so setting yourself up for success early. Um, this is primarily, I'm talking to the crowd that is just starting to learn. And when I say set yourself up for success, don't start flying a hang glider or in a harness that is way above your skill level. If you start trying to jump the gun on something that you're not ready for, you're going to end up putting a lot more stress on your landing situation. So if you can see here, this person is flying, he's having probably a not the greatest time getting upright. His shoulders are forward. He's going to have not be able to get his hands up super high without being in a really awkward position. Um, Same thing with gliders that are flying really fast. If you are, still whacking the nose every other flight on a Falcon, then thinking about a Sport 3 is probably a couple years out, honestly. Um, really try to pace yourself because as soon as you start trying to jump the gun, that's when the fundamentals you start falling behind on them. And also make sure that you're planning things correctly. You got this nice dense pages uh, image of a downwind basement final. We'll talk a little bit about slipping turns later on the approaches because it varies depending on the gliders. And the primary takeaway here is that if you're not thinking about how you're going to be approaching this landing, then how are you going to transition so seamlessly from thinking about an approach to actually figuring out how to land this glider in very wildly varying conditions? So the more that you think about these things ahead of time, the easier the landing is going to be, mostly because your mind is going to be clear. All right. Um, Glider feedback. When I say glider feedback, I think this is much more than a technique perspective, but this is a very much um, an instrument that you need to use. Uh, if you're flying with your hands tight, if you're burying your head on the next lowest point in front of you, then you're probably not receptive to the response that the glider is trying to give you. In other words, uh, the glider is controlling you instead of you controlling the glider. If you start trying to grip the bar, if you're holding on tight, if you're stressed out, if you're not paying attention, all of these are going to work against you. The best method here, have a relaxed grip. I can't emphasize this enough, and it will come up many, many times throughout this video. When I talk about relaxed grip, I'm talking about your hands either, this is a very streamlined down tube, so this is kind of hard to get my thumb around here, but I'm using my hand as a one-way hook, either pulling in, or if I'm getting ready to flare, then I will rest my hand on the back of the down tube lightly so that I'm receptive to the pressure on the back of on the front of my hand on the back of the down tube. So if I'm gripping the bar, then I'm doing isosceles here. So the front of my hand is pushing into the back of my hand, the back of my hand is pushing into the front of my hand. I've lost all bar pressure. I can get pressure from my arms. I can feel the feedback of the glider throughout my arms, but you have much less sensitivity to that. And by the time that you start feeling the bar pressure building up in your arms, you might have already missed your flare window. So being very sensitive to the glider, how it's how what it's telling you as far as energy management is very, very critical. Using ground references, as noted here, is absolutely futile. If you try to use the ground as a judge for how fast you are going, then it is only a matter of time before you will pile drive that nose into the ground. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the approach. So basically, the landing is consists of three main phases. You have the approach, the round out, and the deceleration. So let's talk about the approach a little bit. Already discussed it earlier. You're trying to minimize the amount of surprises, the amount of things that you have to change last minute, things that you have to think about while you're trying to time and judge your flare, because as noted just a minute ago, it's a sensitive operation. You want to try to maintain focus on what the glider is telling you as far as feedback. Um, Maintaining speed appropriate for conditions. I thought this was a great thing to bring up first because a lot of times I'll hear um, people say, with people coming in on approach, you'll hear people commenting on videos while they're taking a video of somebody landing and say, more speed, more speed, more speed. A lot of times that is going to be detrimental. Um, if you're constantly trying, if you're constantly having to stuff the bar into your knees when you're coming into land, then you are not having a very accurate approach. Because if the next landing you have too uh, too much altitude and your bar is stuffed to the knees, and you've lost all variability. So I think that we're all very aware that airspeed equals control. However, if we allow ourselves to be dictated by, um, how should I say, the speed that we're approaching is only one speed and that's really fast, then it's leaving us, it's pigeonholing ourselves to only choosing one airspeed and not allowing us to explore the range of airspeeds that are still safe to approach at, that can also allow us more time to figure out what's going on. Clearly, too slow, you'll stall the glider prematurely, you fall out of the sky. This is certainly true when you encounter turbulence, wind gradients, rotors, if you're landing behind trees, if you're landing behind a hill. If you approach too slow, you're going to hit that wind gradient with little to no airspeed, and the glider is going to just go into an immediate stall. I can guarantee you at that point, no amount of, wishful thinking is going to save you there. You might hit ground effect pretty quickly, and an aggressive flare might save you from that, but your chances of getting out of that unscathed go down rapidly. Too fast, I see people that approach very, very quickly tend to dive for, 30, 40 feet, and then they get about 10 feet off the ground, and then they just dump all that energy and pop right back up to 10 feet. So what'd you really get all that speed for? Well, not much. So if you're going too fast, you got to make sure that you manage it throughout your round out. And if you don't and you pop the nose, well, you're putting yourself in the same situation as being too slow. Or if you continue into the ground, it's going to hurt. Uh, I I was taught a very simple, good checklist that uses the acronym ABLE. Uh, when I'm landing, I ask myself the question, am I able to land? Um, Oops, that's not what I want. Just making sure that everybody, all right, got everybody in the meeting there. Angle of attack as chosen. Again, we need to choose an appropriate airspeed. Body upright or prone, depending on the type of performance of the glider that you're flying. So if you're flying a very low performance glider, you basically have two choices. Um, well, I would say that you really only have one choice. You go upright early. And that's because uh, the amount of time that you have to react from uh, round out to flare or deceleration is relatively short. If you're trying to negotiate going upright in that situation, from prone to upright in that situation, you're leaving yourself open to a lot of risk. As you progress and as you gain more skill, you can certainly uh, practice with this, and it's something that I think leaves you open to more risk for sure because now you're head first. Um, as my instructor has said, it's a lot easier to run on my feet than running on my ears. Um, so you do get a lot of roll authority on the base tube, but the down tubes just give you more time to figure all of the fast transition in the round out and the deceleration on a single surface glider. On higher performance gliders, because of the higher energy retention, you actually have more time. And staying prone all the way through the round out, or at least, upright somewhat with your hand still on the base tube, you have that luxury and that time to kind of think about it, say, okay, this is about the right energy, move one hand up, the other hand up, and then flare. Whereas on a single surface glider, as soon as, just a few seconds after your round out, you're pretty much ready to flare, um, depending on how much energy you carried through and how well you bled it off through your round out. Last one is eyes on target. I think that one's fairly self-explanatory. Don't look at the ground, look ahead of you. Okay. Um, Appreciate all the participation in chat. Feel free as we go through more of the techniques here, uh, in these slides coming up, I certainly encourage you guys to ask questions if you have any. So next part is the round out. The time between anywhere from about 15 feet off the ground to 2 feet off the ground. That is the time that you would start to transition from coming in with a set amount of airspeed to bleeding it off to not impact the ground. How you do that is requires some consideration, some technique there. Keeping your eyes forward, I think, is one of the more important things to practice, because if you're staring at the ground's coming up at you very quickly. It's either going to induce some panic or it's not going to give you a very good sense of where you are relative to the ground, despite thinking that, oh, if I look at the ground, I'm going to know exactly how high I am off the ground. Lies. Because I see everybody that lands, they know exactly when to pick their feet up if before they round out and hit the ground. And then they, get late on their flare, and then, they end up sliding on their belly. So if you tell me that I need to look at the ground, you're lying, especially if you pick your feet up during your round out. You know exactly where the ground is. You're just not training yourself to keep your eyes ahead of you. Um, in this situation, this is where most people pop the nose, and we'll certainly go over videos later. If you come in with a bunch of energy and you dump it all at this point, you're round out, then you're basically putting yourself back at square one, where you're leaving yourself in the situation where the glider can now stall and you lose control about 10 to 15 feet off the ground, where it's an unrecoverable stall, and the amount of risk goes up from there. So maintain as low of altitude as possible without bending your knees. If you got your feet right below you and you skid the ground a little bit, great. Stop. Too low. Bring it back up a little bit. If you start trying to pick your feet up and you're bleeding off energy at knee height, and at some point get dumped and you need to run, you're just going to land on the next lowest part of your body. Picking your feet up does absolutely nothing to help you at this point during the round out. And finally, deceleration. So there's a few different methods here that I, want to cover. I'm sure there's probably a couple more that I'd missed. The first one being the Runout Landing, which is just as you would expect expect it to be. Uh, Basically minimal flare, trying to transition smoothly from flying to running to slowing down, coming to a complete stop. Um, Full flare, which is what you would see a lot of East Coast pilots do, where they have a very intricate combination of timing, of bar pressure, of, wings level, all to come down to this nice pop and, dumping the airspeed all at once, sticking the keel in the ground, and hopefully either have everybody applaud you as you land or laugh at you because you just pile drive your nose into the ground. Um, this is the most committal of the landings, but sometimes it's necessary. I would say that it's actually should be at the bottom of the list, even below impact, because it is such a uh, unique and committal landing that it leaves very little room for error. The Crescendo Flare, which is basically just it's more of like a run out landing without the moving of the feet. The two-step flare, we'll get into that. It's kind of a nuanced thing, but technical, and impact. So don't do anything, you're gonna hit the ground. All right. So run out landing. Um, again, technique comes into play here. Having your hands cupped, either pulling in, feeling that bar pressure as you're on approach throughout your round out, feeling the glider slowly bleed off energy, looking ahead, trying not to gain any altitude, and searching for trim speed. Once you search for trim speed, you can start feeling the ground out in front of you, start your run, and as your feet contact, then you have two gauges of altitude. Uh, One being your sight, your visual altitude, and two, the feeling that you have against the ground. If you're very light on your feet, then that means that you are at, I don't know, whatever your height normally is, plus an inch or two because you're on your tiptoes. If you're heavy on your feet, you're right at about your body height. If you're stomping on the ground and feel like you're holding the weight of the world up, you're probably gripping the bar and it's probably getting ahead of you. Uh, but that means that you're a little bit low, time to decelerate a little bit more. So this landing requires that you have your feet below you, that you start running even a little bit early, trying to reach for the ground, and to have a smooth but continuous progression of pushing out. Uh, Sometimes, maybe in an emergency situation, if you suddenly need to decelerate, you could hold the glider back and come to a quick stop, put your feet out and, really try to hold the glider back. It may lead to you whacking the nose, but in some situations, it's better than trying to pop a flare real early, climbing out 10 feet and then landing on your butt, which, as we've seen with paragliding for the last uh, couple decades, can lead to back problems. And I should also say that because you're doing a run out landing does not mean that you have to commit at any point to only doing a run out landing. If you are ready to, if you feel like you can need to complete the flare by, dumping all that energy, well, you're already on the ground. So you've already got your feet on the ground. You're already noticing that you're heavy on your feet. If you dump all that energy at that point, the risk is pretty low. So uh, if, oh, notice that I didn't complete the slide here. So you could basically turn the run out landing into any of these three things. It's gives you the most variability in the landing because you're using your feet as an altimeter, as a gauge for landing. Um, Probably, not an impact, but that was a mistake left over in there. So, um, can I not play this video? There we go. So let me play this video here. 2241. All right. So here's a good example of a runout landing. Can I get this snap?
Where's Butthead?
I have to make to bring it over.
He's flying his RC down.
Rusty.
You brought it?
He's
No,
running
I
down
don't
the
have it
elevator
today.
down.
A lot of modern communities.
So notice he continued to decelerate and using the feet as a gauge. Now he did that, kind of a trick, 1 foot hopping along the ground, but he knows exactly how much energy he has left. If all of a sudden he got really heavy on that feet, just dump the energy, finish the flare. If he's, was hopping and then all of a sudden he left the ground, well, stop pushing out, continue to run it out. So you notice how he continued to decelerate, and he at that point you could also do weight shift if you're running on with the landing. Uh, yeah, I can well, I can't maximize here. um, but if you need to do full screen, then we can review it later at the full screen. So yeah, Renault Landing I think gives you the most variability. It can also put you in a situation where you are going too slow and you end up flare or behind the curve and you flare late or have a really weak flare, or the glider gets ahead of you and you're running and you're trying to now outpace the glider. Uh, that can certainly be an issue. And sometimes if you miss the timing on the flare, it might even be worse than not flaring at all, because now you're dumping all that energy and forward, and the glider is now starting to dive. So won't get too much into the emergency procedures there. We'll have plenty of videos to review later. Okay. The full flare technique. This is probably the most common one that people learn, which I think is a little unfortunate. It's a very committal landing, and I really only use it in a very few set of conditions. No wind and low turbulence or tailwind. If I do not meet those two conditions, I'm I never use a full flare landing. But it's not to say it shouldn't be practiced. And the technique for this is uh, hands even with your shoulder, and I should even back up a little bit more. As you uh, round out and you find trim, you transition your hands up, palms on the back of the down tubes and open, and you wait. You wait for the bar to start pushing on the back of your on the front of your hand, it giving that back pressure. That is the time where the glider is going from trim speed and is getting a little bit below trim, so it wants to recover and drop the nose again. Depending on how you have the glider trimmed, assuming that it's at a relatively slow speed, I'm guessing that not a whole lot of people have the glider trimmed at best L over D. This is about the perfect time to flare. As soon as that, not just as soon, but as soon as you start to feel that pressure build up, and it varies a little bit depending on the glider because of trim speed, but that window, that range of feedback is the perfect time to execute a full flare. Uh, and that is when you do the full up and, well, out and up, not just forward, out and up to slow the glider down, to pop the nose, to dump all that energy at once, and then have your feet swing forward and you land on both feet. Um, Something, and I'll show in a video later, that I've been practicing and think that is useful is to actually have 1 foot back and 1 foot ready to run. Again, because this is such a committal technique and because I use this mostly in a no wind landing situation, um, or tailwind, I want to be ready to run my ass off even if I execute a perfectly timed flare. A perfectly timed flare that's going to leave you with no energy left over in a 5 knot tailwind means that you still have to run 5 knots. So still prepare yourself to run in the event that you need to. And the 1 foot back just gives you that extra leverage without committing to not having a foot to stand on if all of a sudden you need to abort that full flare and run. Okay. I have a nice video from Erica. Um, oh, come on. Nope, doesn't want to play it. Um, that's okay. I have a backup. And I can't do quite full screen because my camera's in the way here, so do this. Okay. So it's this landing here, and I think she executed it quite well. So notice that she has one hand up, one hand down. That's great. Preparing yourself for that transition by only transitioning one hand certainly leaves you with less of a chance to pop your nose. So we'll watch her landing here. Both hands up, starting to run a little bit, feet back, and flares. So notice that it is one smooth motion out and up to come to a complete stop. Had to climb the hands up a little bit because she felt the back pressure build, I'm sure. And notice the hands, how you can see that she has her hands fully wrapped around the down tubes, but trying to stay loose with the fingers to best judge when the flare needs to be executed based on feedback of the glider, not based on ground speed. And this is out in Casa Grande, Arizona. So most of the time out here, you're looking at nil wind landings anyways. All right. You could argue that it was that landing is a little bit more between, decided to play finally, is more between a crescendo flare and a full flare. This is probably more of a mixture of the two. A full flare would be feedback, waiting, for a few seconds and then punching it. But on a Falcon, that is your range of your flare window range. It happens pretty quick. So single surface gliders, unfortunately, uh, this tends to be one of the more challenging landings to learn. Okay, crescendo flare. Uh, this is very similar to the full flare, but it involves a smooth progression of the flare basically from trim. So as you are as you reach trim and the glider is decelerating, so long as you are at the proper altitude from the ground, you begin your deceleration by first resisting and then slowly pushing out on the bar until you come to a complete stop and varying that speed as necessary to maintain the height above the ground that you want, which ideally is, just an inch, you just want to be ready to take that first step on the ground. Uh, so you can adjust your hand position as necessary. Maybe you're coming in at trim, or you're coming in with speed. Hands are about elbow height, and then you want to decelerate, scoot your hands up a little bit, slow it down, hands up higher, more, and then come to a complete stop with the flare. Expect a little bit of running in this case, unless you tune it just right. And this is also where you can use sound as another useful gauge for trying to decelerate or trying to judge your airspeed. So as I've said, through so far, that trying to use only glider feedback is the best way to judge your angle of attack, how much energy your glider has left. Airspeed, or sorry, noise, sound can also be very helpful too. It is a pretty direct correlation to airspeed versus ground speed. So if you're going 20 miles an hour over the ground in a tailwind, once you reach stall speed, it's going to be quiet. So as long as you're not using the ground as a reference, then sound can also be very useful. And it shows itself, it shows its strength more in the crescendo flare, in my opinion, because you have more time to judge it. Whereas with the full flare landing, you're always, you pretty much have one shot at it. And if you judge that sound just a little bit wrong, you might be up in a bad situation. This technique, I would say, is more suited for light to moderate winds. Certainly, you see people at Fort Funston, you see people at Point Mountain Southside, people that land with some moderate wind. It's a very common, very useful type of flare. And in more benign turbulence to some moderate turbulence, I think that this is one of the more user-friendly flares because it allows that variability. Combine that with some notes of a runout landing, and you can be quite safe by combining the two. Okay. Nice. This one loaded pretty quick. So unfortunately, the cameraman is zoomed out through this, but you can see the progression of the flare, how my feet are never touching the ground, but I'm continuing to slow the glider down. And this is even in a crosswind, and as I'm slowing the glider down, the glider yaws back into the wind. What happened there? So I'll play it again. And this is at the beach, so pretty much everything else is cheating at this point. The approach is slow, everything's, very different than a mountain approach. But just trying to smoothly, slowly progress that flare once I reach the right altitude, holding it off and maintaining a consistent altitude off the ground. So progressing that flare so that I, just touch down exactly at the moment that the glider runs out of airspeed. Or that I should say at the exact time that I reach zero ground speed. Right. So I got some more videos here of a Crescendo Flair. This is oh, I worked this time. Great. Move to 2142.
Pressure, but the pressure is starting to go down now.
He's not in the
They're
coma.
not going to know anything. They've got to make a drug use.
This is a rigid wing hang glider, but I think it's they executed this landing really nicely. So a little bit of a pop, but this is the Runout Landing. So notice how I can't use the arrows. Sorry.
A woman got thrown from a horse just down the street.
All right. So notice how he's reaching out with his feet, and this ends up being a Runout Landing. And he's controlling the glider in roll throughout the entire process. So at no point is he just dumping all the energy. He's actually slowing the glider down continuously, running, and then decelerating on his feet while the glider slows down. So he's not dumping all that energy at once. He's controlling it very carefully throughout the entire landing sequence. Okay, we got another one here, 305, same rigid wing.
Oh my god, what a liar.
Beautiful, smooth crescendo flare. So notice how, keep doing it. We'll figure it out sooner or later.
Because he's a nice guy. Oh my God, what a liar.
So wait, is that the altitude that he wants? He's not gaining any altitude, just slowly bleeding off that energy, taking a few steps, completing the flare at the end. So that is what I would call a crescendo flare. Um, oh, I think I messed up there. That out of the way. Okay. Um, Finally, the two-step flare. I didn't have enough time to find a good video of a two-step flare. This was talked about highly by my instructor. I've used it a handful of times. It can get you out of a bad situation if you end up popping the nose early. So I think it's worth looking at. Basically, it's similar to the full flare, except instead of waiting for that moment to have the glider settle on the back of your hands, you give it a little bump, let the glider climb out, and then as the glider starts to settle back down, then you do a complete full flare. This has been reported to me uh, actually to be a good method for people that have a tough time with flare authority. Girls, small girls or guys that can't, get full arm extension or maybe don't have the upper body strength, um, or maybe they're just flying a glider that's a little too big for them. This two-step flare seems to work pretty well. It also helps you with judging the flare timing by having a bit more of a visual reference, as you can see the glider settling and you can see that change in altitude for when you need to execute the flare. Now, of course, the question comes in, if you do a slight bump and you pop up 20 feet, then you probably don't want to just wait till the glider settles back down again and then flare. You're basically starting over at square one at that point. The amount of altitude that you should be gaining is probably no more in the realm of, 2 or 3 feet. The most dangerous point in any landing to be is 5 to 10 feet off the ground, because that is a time where you could get hit by turbulence, you get dumped by some sink, your wing drops, and you don't have enough time to regain airspeed, and you don't have enough time to get your feet back on the ground to abort a flare. So, while this is a great technique to use for the reasons that I listed earlier, it is certainly something that you want to practice first before trying to get yourself into a or using it as a safe landing method. Um, it also can work out, say that you popped your nose a little early, that you can use the two-step flare to then uh, wait for the glider to settle and then execute a flare if the glider has not regained sufficient airspeed. Expect to run for this. Just like with every other flare, I would say that all flares and all landings require a certain amount of running, with the exception of the full flare in some cases. And last but not least, impact. I think that this is not talked about a lot. I think that people tend to shy away from discussing how to crash. Oops, didn't mean to do that. If you at any point think that your landing attempts are going to leave you on the ground, if your landing attempts are not working out for you, then you should be thinking about what you need to do in an emergency situation. You can see in this picture here that the guy is actually throwing his feet forward. He's grabbing onto the down tubes, hoisting himself up, and throwing his feet over the bar so he can land feet first. It's kind of a acrobatic maneuver, but it's certainly better than landing head first. Um, the other technique that I think works quite well is grabbing one down tube so your body can swing around the down tube, or at least, let your body impact broadside versus, again, head first. In any situation, don't give up flying the glider unless you think it is absolutely futile. And try to run. If you're, again, in a full flare situation, get those feet moving if you think that you're about to abort. If you are, knees down on the ground or knees dragging across the ground, try and regain that altitude, keep flying the glider, and try to get your feet underneath you. And certainly, if you're still learning, if you're still practicing, fly with wheels, basically until you're ready to go to a high performance glider. Not a Sport 3. Sport 3, I think you would still benefit a lot from flying with wheels or a gecko or something. I'm talking about, like a couple of years on a topless high performance glider, unless you've spent hundreds of hours and many, many years on a single surface glider. So don't take don't try to think that it's a theoretical discussion. Um, discuss among other pilots, well, if you're in this situation, how would you best get out of it? Or how would you have got out of it? You say, well, I would have, first not, um, gotten in the situation that he's in, fine. But, um, at some point we all get into a situation that we really don't have any control over. The one, I think I said I've broken two down tubes. I have bent one in the same landing that I broke the other one, so I didn't count it, but we'll say for argument's sake, out of the two out of the three down tubes that I've broken, one of them was landing at Big Sur in Sand Dollar Beach, the cliff just behind the parking lot to Sand Dollar Beach. It was about 20 miles an hour. I landed really close to the cliff. It was a crosswind landing. It's a sheer cliff. There's no smooth rolling. I think it's actually an undercut, so the rotor is massive. And I still can't tell you exactly what happened. The glider went from pitch down, pitched up, back to pitch down. Um, and uh, he and I really um, didn't didn't have any time to react. So the only thing that I could do, because I was put back prone because I was in a knee hanger harness, was to brace for impact, hold on to the down tubes, and go full extension and let the down tubes take all the impact. And the next thing that hit after the down tubes was the nose plate. Next thing that hit was my face. So you can certainly get yourself into situations that, regardless of how much you practice, how much we discuss about the perfect landing techniques, um, the Mother Nature sometimes will win. Of course, hindsight's 2020. Don't get yourself in those situations in the first place. But you know, we're not omnipotent, and we can't see the air. So sometimes you really don't know how bad it is until you get into it. All right. This is a little bit of an unfinished slide here. Emergency procedures. I think I've touched on a couple of these subjects already. I do want to talk about the importance of staying low to the ground, having the wings level, or how it benefits keeping your wings level. So if you're getting low to the ground, say just a foot off the ground, or where your feet are just about to touch the ground, if you can maintain that altitude, then there is a very good chance that the ground effect alone will help keep your wings leveled for you. Even if one wing drops just before you're about to flare, sometimes ground effect can kind of help pick that wing back up. So it's it's not emphasized enough, I think, that keeping low to the ground is very important. Trying to not only for ground effect, but also to make sure that you're not flaring too high and dropping on the ground, to minimize turbulence, just because everywhere that we go, there are wind gradients, and that includes thermals as well and turbulence. So the turbulence is usually going to be the least at ground level. So it also hedges against that. Um, I think that's enough said on that situation. Okay. I've got a bunch of videos. I want to go through them. I think in the Google Meet, because I have not paid for a subscription, um, which is great. That there is only 7 minutes left in the call, so we can restart that. If anybody wants to ask a question with audio, I will now also open up the uh, messages or the chat here on Google Meet, so everybody can talk if they would like. And also in the chat, if you have any questions on what I've reviewed so far, please uh, leave your questions there and I will answer them. So I will give a few minutes for everybody to uh, speak now or wait to ask questions later. And there's probably a little bit of latency. Um, so, okay. I think Takeo's in the call. He wanted to ask a question. Or maybe not. Maybe he's just joining for the fun of it. Um, just get a couple more drinks of water. Okay. Um, I'll probably be sharing videos of people that you may know. I'll probably,
I'm just lurking when you.
Okay, cool. Also, I think the Google Meet ends as well
No
here.
questions from me, and I just think this is a really great topic and glad that you're doing it. It
Awesome.
does look like there's a
There's a bit of latency. Um, so let's see. Everybody there. Okay, so anyways, thank you for all the encouraging comments. I appreciate it. Let's see. I have a question here from me. Without having seen the two-step landing, it just sounds like what I've been told not to do, which is to take back the flare. Do people really do this? Yes, it's actually a technique. And like I said, it's a very gentle bump just to gain a little bit of altitude. And then as the glider starts to settle back down again, to execute the rest of the flare. you'll see a lot of people do this even for uh, um, people that only use full flare landings. It's kind of a means to fix a botched landing. I think what you're describing is certainly what I would say is a common complaint among a lot of pilots to say, you never, don't take back the flare. If you bump it, well, you haven't pushed out enough to take back anything. If you left your hands, just with that little bump, then the glider's just going to slowly decelerate until you've lost all your energy. Now you're 5 feet off the ground, you've got no flare authority left, and you're just going to drop. At some point, the glider just doesn't have enough energy to keep going. And depending on where you're at, determines the fate of that landing. So if you are ready to run, great. If you're 5 feet off the ground and all of a sudden the glider is stalling and you try to push out and nothing happens, then you've got nothing left. So I would say, as far as, taking back the flare, that sometimes it's appropriate. Sometimes you have to evaluate when taking back the flare is necessary. If you pop up 20 feet, then yeah, you better get it back under control. But you have to be smooth, you have to be gentle. Sometimes, you might give up a lot of energy, bring that bar back in just ever so slightly. I wouldn't even say pull in sometimes, just let that bar come back, let the glider build back up speed, and be ready to dump it back all again. Or dump all that speed off again if you're in a real dire situation. But most of the time, if you get popped up real high, then you can just let the bar come back in, resettle back down to the ground, and again, you'll enter ground effect once again. That's the beauty of trying to get close to the ground, round out near the ground, and letting the ground effect kind of cushion the landing, help you get a little bit more glide, give you more time to think about the landing. I think this might be the video, or it might be the next one. So spoiler alert, I do pick on Lee John a little bit. Nothing against him. I think he's a swell guy, but he's got some great learning points. I really hope that he doesn't mind. Looks like the Google Meet ended because of a paywall, which is super unfortunate. But at the end of this stream, I will post a link to a Google Meet, so we can do kind of a after show, so to speak. If you guys would like to sit and review videos, because Friday night, this is what I do on Friday nights. So let's get straight into it. So coming in with a lot of speed, knees almost to the base tube, almost to his thighs. So it seemed pretty good up until, the last little bit. I would say that there was a couple things that went wrong here. One is, notice that he is grabbing the bar, he's climbing his hands up the bar. I know in these Z5 harnesses, sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to get upright in, so that could be one of the situations there. But by climbing your hands that high up, it also reduces your sensitivity to the bar pressure and the feedback of the glider. And if you're not sensitive to that, then like I said, it's easy to, use other cues for landing, and by that time, you're already too slow. If you think that you're able to use other cues other than bar pressure. So let's watch it again. So he's coming in fast, he's bleeding off that energy a little bit high maybe, and he's transitioning. He transitioned and the nose pops up. So this is kind of setting himself up for almost a two-step flare, but he's late. So glider pops a little bit. Now look at where he's at. About 4 or 5 feet off the ground. Not enough to really pull in anymore, but certainly not a place where you should be holding the flare, especially because he didn't bleed off a bunch of speed. And this is super common. This is why the transition from with your hands needs to happen when the bar pressure is at a minimum, either at trim speed or way before you enter in for your approach. So let's finish up with the video. Climbing his hands up, and notice how the glider starts to drop again. His hands are high, he's leaning on the bar. He's pulling down on the bar because he's trying to hoist himself up, getting ready for that, big punchy flare. And he gave a little bump, and, as soon as that glider started to settle, man, should have gave it a big shove at that point because he was a little bit too late. He held it, but he didn't quite finish it, and the glider stalled. And by the time he gave that second bump, the glider's already stalled. You got nothing left, except to run. So in this case, the glider hit the ground, and we had a little oopsie. So not too bad, but good learning. Good, really, really good learning tool there. Okay, what's next? Not a graceful hang glider landing. That's okay. Let's see what he's got. Okay, again, and he's in a Falcon, so notice the difference here. Tons of speed, tons of speed, tons of speed, tons of speed, and dumps it all right there. Dumps all that airspeed. Now, again, trying to come in, trying to bring those hands back up for a full flare, but now he's in a double whammy situation. Not only did he dump all that airspeed, he's behind a hill, so he's hitting a massive wind gradient right now. So all that airspeed that he's gained by diving the glider at the ground, he just gave it all up, and in unfortunately a really bad place. So in this situation, is there much coming back from here? Not much, because look, he's fully flared. I mean, his arms are full extension. You can see that hang strap is all the way back, and that glider keeps on dropping. Now, I could, maybe play devil's advocate and say, well, or you could play devil's advocate. I'm just being the devil here. You could say that his hands were being really, really tight, and therefore that caused the glider's nose to drop and the nose rotated down. That's certainly a good observation to make, but I think that the landing became unsalvageable a little bit earlier than this. So let's finish watching. Bonk. All right, not too bad. And I want to let it replay. It's on a loop here. So I think that had he, once he dumped that energy and he got popped up, had he, just give it a little tug, pulled it back in and been ready to then flare pretty quickly after that, might have been able to save it. But the fact that he kind of hung there and you kind of laid, or you kind of had the glider idling, in a nose high attitude and let it just stall and settle back down, didn't have enough airspeed to really recover. Okay. Next one. So this is a video where I started realizing that I'd been using kind of a 1 foot back technique, and you'll see where I actually shift my legs throughout the landing. So as I try to keep the wings level, you'll notice that one leg is back at one time, and then I throw the other leg back to try and compensate for a weight shift. So let's watch. So transitioning, and notice that would have been a pop. That would have been a pop in any other situation, because I was going uphill, I could afford that little early transition. And see how the leg right leg is back first, and then right before I flare, I throw the left leg back to try and uh, keep that turn from happening that I noticed was starting to form. So um, I think that, as the adage, or as the technique has been taught with the full flare landings, having both feet back to give you better flare authority, that's certainly an advantage in that. But again, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to, if you don't catch it at the right time and you don't give a powerful enough flare to throw both of those feet forward and land, you know, uh, like Wolfie did in that first picture I showed. You could trip, could, not have your feet ready to run. There's a lot of situations where it may not end very well for you. So something interesting that I thought hopefully will be helpful to some people. Maybe not. This is kind of a new technique that I've been dabbling with and really exploring more. Okay, this one was interesting. It kind of uh, plays more into a combination of issues. One is approach planning, and two is flying the glider all the way to the ground, as well as trying to um, land in a turn. So without further ado, let's watch the video. You almost think he's going to land on the road. um, so I wasn't sure if I think he was trying to hit that little ridge, the top part of the ridge, but realized that he wasn't going to be able to get the glider turned around in time. So now he's getting slow. He's transitioned at kind of a weird time. All right, we're saved it. But definitely, not the most comfortable landing. Is, definitely a bit of a pucker factor there. So let's watch it again here. Okay. First note, you can see how his, the skin on his hands is all, stretched out. So that means he's definitely got a bit of a death grip going on. Not helping out with his flare timing or landing, but also his wings aren't leveled. And you could argue that, say, let's kind of use our imagination here. What would happen if if this wasn't just, like a wet sand? What if this was a break wall? What if this was, serious surf, where any landing in that water would spell disaster? So imagine that he had no choice but to continue to turn because he was uh, trying to avoid an obstacle. Um, so right there he flares, but notice that he flares and the glider doesn't seems to react a little bit, but it's immediately starts to settle again. And that's because of the grip. If he had opened up his hands, then the glider would have rotated more easily, and he wouldn't have been, countering his pushing out by grabbing the down tubes, causing the weight to then shift back forward again. So a lot of these incidents that you see where people, do this really aggressive flare and then the glider nose just dumps is because they're grabbing the bar and they're throwing their weight forward, because as soon as they go full extension, um, and the glider isn't rotating them back up, the only thing that's left is for them to hoist themselves up, because it's like, well, and I don't want to go in face first on the ground, so I'm gonna pull my face back up so I'm not hitting, and that just puts the weight back forward. Now he does run, which is excellent. I think that's certainly what saved him here. I think he could have, moved his hands up higher and uh, continue to slow the glider down. And this is also a situation where, having some differential flare would be valuable. Once he is no longer in danger of impacting that target, stopping the flare with that left hand, pushing out as hard as you can with the right to try and yaw the glider and to try to bring that right wing back up, or at least keep it from accelerating into that turn. So I would say in this situation, you're kind of stuck in, if you're having to land in some kind of a turn, that you're basically stuck with trying to run to some extent, especially if you don't have wind to help you slow down. Okay, kind of an interesting one. I don't really have too much else to say on that. It's kind of well, didn't really plan it right, but you pulled it off. And I think that there's a lot to learn from this other than just the landing. Okay. This one was interesting. This guy just, did a low pass over everybody, and everybody, ducked for cover. Now he's coming in on approach. He's got a topless glider. He's totally prone, and he's right on the deck. I mean, he could stick his hand out and grab a dandelion. And then he pops up, and nice, beautiful flare. Notice something here. At no point did his wing ever drop. At no point did he ever need a weight shift. Now I'm sure that, it's a nice grassy field. Okay, there's no turbulence, yada, yada, yada. But the fact that he pretty much needed zero weight shift input throughout that entire landing is pretty amazing. So just another bit of ammunition for my um, uh, for beating the drum on making sure that you're using ground effect to your fullest advantage. This one's a bit long, but every landing in here I thought was, had a lot to learn from. I'll probably go through a few here, but I probably won't go through all of them unless people want to stick around. So I'll stop at some point. Um, by the way, whoever made this had some really great commentary or some really great funny sound overlaid. So definitely watch it. So notice how high he is here. This is really the worst place to be in a landing. Is like 5 feet off or 10 feet off the ground. You've got no ground effect to help you out. You're really at risk of getting tossed and turned. If you get into a turn at in this situation, you can try and bring it back in a little bit and weight shift. But if you try to progress a flare that's not absolutely perfect at this altitude, you're going to hit the ground pretty hard. So you notice how the glider started to settle. You saw the nose drop, and then he executed the flare, and that actually worked out pretty nice. So if you can execute that by maintaining, a very close proximity to the ground and being more sensitive to when that glider wants to regain that airspeed, you can achieve the same thing without putting yourself in that kind of risk. All right. Um, it's this one kind of was interesting because he slows down right here, and you can see him pushing out. And notice that he goes from a little bit of a bank left turn, he pushes out, and the glider starts banking the other way. And it's like, what the heck? Why didn't it accelerate into that turn? I think because the glider actually, is kind of uh, it, for whatever reason, maybe it was a crosswind. Um, the the right wing stalled first, or it got a significantly lower or higher angle of attack in that turn, despite what you would think that the inside wing would lose all of its lift first. So that can happen if your wings aren't level and you pop and you do a flare, then there is a chance that you'll actually ride uh, ride the glider straight again. Um, I've seen it a number of times. Um, Speaking of, I'm gonna see if I can find this video here. I think it was really, really good now that I'm on the subject, but I don't think I have it prepared. So stand by for just a second. This is a great time if you have any questions to ask them in the chat while I'm searching this up. Please feel free to ask questions. I am here to help. Okay, found the video I wanted. Okay, looks like no questions in the chat, which is fine. But I do encourage questions because there are a lot of nuanced things in landing. And just like with Mi's question, I think, there's a lot of things that I don't cover and don't even think of, but a good chance I have at least a thought on it. Maybe not a full explanation, but a thought. So again, with the rigid wings, uh, I actually have not flown a rigid wing yet, but their landings seem to intrigue me somehow. So notice that he's going to execute a flare. Maybe this is the wrong one. Okay, I think it's this one. Probably the same guy, but different landing. Okay. Kind of a subtle thing, but it's a very, very important point. So notice that he's coming in, gets his hands up, and wait for it, right here. The glider's starting to turn to the right. Keeps turning to the right. Keeps turning. He flares, lands perfectly. Does not accelerate into that turn. Why? I don't know. But it seems that if the wings are starting to bank, but the glider has not yawed into that turn yet, if you flare before the yaw occurs, the wings will level themselves. Weird thing. Don't know why, but it kind of works. I'll play that for you again. Wings level, right turn, flare, left wing hits first. Pretty interesting. RJ asked a question. Do you have any thoughts on throwing your legs forward as a way to prevent injury when crashing? It depends. I think that a lot of times you don't have time to throw your legs forward during a crash. I think I showed that one video, or not the video, that picture where the guy is actually throwing his feet forward. I think I may have tried doing this once. You kind of have to prepare yourself to do it. And maybe that's something that you want to try to prepare yourself for. I think that it's certainly uh, a possibility. Yeah, this is actually the video that I pulled it from that Erica sent, the bracing for impact, which I do encourage you guys to go view. It is this one, bracing for impact on a hang glider. I think it's actually pretty good. So I think it's this part where, you're throwing your feet forward for a landing. It's pretty good actually. Because, I'd rather hit feet first than face first. That's for sure. Um, how likely are you going to be able to execute that? Well, um, I don't know. I think it's probably a pretty good thing to practice, but man, you got to be ready for it. I think in any situation, having your feet underneath you gives you a very, very, oh, whack. That was pretty bad. It gives you a much higher chance of being able to recover a landing versus just, punching with the flare or, letting go, maybe balling up um, might be better than, just letting go and just saying like, just kind of letting it go at that point. Hopefully that answers your question. I don't have a good answer because it really depends on the quick-wittedness of the pilot, and it depends a lot on the um, how much you've actually thought about it ahead of time, because a lot of accidents will cause you just to freeze. Scary landing, well, panic. That's usually the first thing that happens. So, um, you know, think about these things for sure. Think about, what you would do in all these situations. Go through YouTube and watch a lot of these guys, hit hard. And it's like, well, you know, especially if they reported any kind of injury, how might you be able to prevent that? It does create a lot of hearsay, creates a lot of back and forth. Oh, I think this way is better. I think that way is better. Um, yeah, I think the only thing to be said there is just don't uh, don't give up flying the glider. And if at any point you do give up flying the glider, get your feet in front of you. Okay, I think that's enough said on that. Uh, let's see. Takeo asked a question. Do you have thoughts about what kind of landing you are planning on doing when you execute your approach, or do you make the decision on the fly? I usually am anticipating a uh, the landing beforehand. So if I'm landing at the beach, then I'm probably going to be doing like a runout landing or some kind of, very smooth crescendo flare. If I'm landing in the middle of a desert where I am pretty certain that the wind conditions are going to be light, if not downwind, then I'm going to be executing either a very aggressive crescendo flare or um, a full flare landing. I have, over the years gotten pretty accustomed to the speeds and the sounds that my glider makes. And I kind of use that as a reference. So if it's silent and I'm going 10 miles an hour over the ground, that crescendo flare is going to immediately become a, uh, life or death, just bam, punch it, full flare landing. Actually, I have a funny story. I was landing in Richfield, Utah, or Monroe, Utah, a couple years ago. It was dusk. Sun had already set. I was trying my hardest to get down in the glass off. And I land next to this road, and a truck rolls down the road. And I say, great. It's a, great wind dummy. So, or not wind dummy, but great wind indicator. And I see all this dust moving across the ground. So I set myself up for this nice, beautiful approach. And I'm on base leg, and I noticed that the dust has reversed direction. And I was like, "Oh no, you didn't." And I was like, I was already pretty much, on my final turn and probably about 20 feet off the ground. So I said, I could try to bring it around, but I think this is probably about the time that I'm going to use the hardest flare I can. So get down, ground effect, waiting, 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 bam, punch it. And I was a little bit late, but I ran, I still had to run pretty aggressively. Luckily, dumped enough speed to have a safe landing. So your choice of landing is pretty dynamic. And I think you should be constantly evaluating it depending on the conditions. But kind of, narrow the range down. Okay, I'm probably not going to, dump this a full flare landing in a 30-mile-an-hour wind. That's silly. Um, the same thing as like I'm not going to do like a baby, crescendo flare in a downwind landing. So there's certainly extremes that you can eliminate possibilities altogether, but definitely have a plan. Okay, I have more videos, but do keep the questions coming because this is the kind of conversation that I would like to capture for people that are going to be viewing this later. Okay, I think we already saw that landing. Whack. So that was kind of a crescendo landing, but you notice how he's dumping all of his airspeed pretty early. So he pulled it off nicely here, but again, it's just leaving yourself open to more and more risk. You could kind of count that as almost a two-step flare. Notice how he does a little bump early on, bump, and then finishes the flare. I'd still probably count that as more of a full flare, but if that bump were just a bit more aggressive, and the glider climbed out a little bit more, and to have that noticeable, visual pitch for you to judge, then that would be a nice two-step flare landing. Okay. I've got another question from Takeo. Do you have a practice menu for the various types of landing? Yeah, I think there's a wiki on hanggliding.org that displays more types of landings than I uh, have listed here, actually. Some of them I think are just kind of repeats of others, or like, one person coined this term for the same kind of landing. Like, there's some uh, there's some variability there that I think there's enough overlap to just eliminate certain types of landings and just say, well, it's close enough to this one. Let me find it here. It's on the wiki, references, other. I'm trying to find it so I can post a link in the chat. Hmm. It doesn't look like I can find it right now, but there is kind of a cheat sheet. It's it's also just, knowledge that I've accumulated over the years. Um, let's see. Do you have another question? Do you have a quote follow through during the run out? I see a lot of runouts that go bad because people look at the ground. Um, I think as long as you follow the technique that I outlined, where you're or where you're trying to continuously slow the glider down, and not grabbing onto the, this is it's very important that as you're doing a run out landing, that you're cupping your hands, because if you start to grab the down tubes at all, and you slow down, at some point the glider is going to want to stall, right? And then the glider is going to start getting ahead of you and then dropping. If you're tight, that's going to exacerbate the issue. If you have your hands open and you notice the bar, if you notice the bar sliding down your hand, so it's sliding down your hand, then you can either bring it back to a stop, or you can try and give a last, push to finish the flare. But at that point, you might just be better off trying to slow it down by holding it back. I would say also make sure that you're continuing to look up. Don't look at the ground because that also tends to get you tight on the bar. Most of the run out landings I see that go wrong, it's because they're grabbing the bar, and as soon as they're on their feet and they have to support their body pitching forward, and they counter that by grabbing the down tubes, it goes all downhill from there. There's certainly other situations where run out landing can go bad. So I I think this is actually a landing that a very famous pilot, Instagram famous pilot had in Utah, where um, they tried to do a run out landing and it was light wind, high altitude, you know, late, a little bit of a late flare, didn't give it a real good push out, and the glider ended up getting a little ahead of them, and it dropped. And despite your best efforts, and this is what I have emphasized a couple times, and I'll emphasize it again, um, just to make it clear. Uh, a late weak flare may be worse than no flare at all. And that's unfortunately what happened in their situation. The base tube snagged a bush and hit pretty hard, broke their arm, sucked. So this is even something. This is even a landing that our instructor had to kind of reconsider. And he's just like, maybe I need to stop teaching this run out landing so religiously. And it's like, yeah, it's not a foolproof landing. It's just the most variable landing. It's the most versatile landing. Okay, where was I? Yeah, more carnage. Yeah, he landed in a crosswind there, and that's why you don't land, do full committal flares and wind, because at some point you're at the mercy of the wind. So he landed in a pretty big crosswind. Right wing clearly got picked up pretty good. All right, a little funky approach, but looked all right there. I'm gonna have a cutoff here for running through videos, uh, probably in about 10 minutes, just to kind of keep the video short. Maybe make it round two later. Yeah, so you could see that a landing like that could have easily, been a run out landing, but just a late flare. So imagine they were running right there and trying to slow the glider down. Yeah, just trying to be, trying to dump that speed, but right there, the glider is stalled, and it's in a deep stall. And no amount of pushing at that point is going to bring it back. Um, at that point, you either need to climb your hands up really high and dump it, or run faster than the glider and try to build airspeed by pushing the glider's nose up and out. But it's hard to do because, you just hit the ground pretty hard. You just dropped from 5 feet. Now you're tight on the bar. Now the glider's starting to drop again. You see these compounding issues starting to build up. The landings can easily get way ahead of you if you're tight, if you're not really anticipating what's happening with the glider, or what are the consequences of your landing from these little nuanced things like rounding out too high, trying to start your flare too high, not being ready to run, things like that. Let's watch that one again. That's glider stalled right there, and she pulled it off. I think it's a she. I'm not sure. She almost didn't. High pucker factor there. M. Kroll asked, or has had a comment there. My instructor used to say, top of the grass is top of the ground, is because ground effects works same above a top of tall grass, etc. I I would say that in some situations, yes. But I think it uh, plays more into, treat whatever the highest obstacle is as the ground. Because if you drag your feet through some bushes or some tall grass and the base tube snags the tall grass, you're going to power whack, and I mean power whack into whatever it is you're landing into. So I don't think that using or that a bed of bushes necessarily makes the ground effect happen any higher. Maybe a little bit. I think it's probably diminished somewhat because it's a you can think of it as like a porous surface almost, like instead of rounding out on uh, over concrete and that air has nowhere to go, you're landing over a fine mesh screen that's several layers thick, so air can go through it, but it's just has a harder time going through it. So I think the key takeaway there is if you're landing um, and there's obstacles, to treat the top of the bush or top of the grass, whatever, as the ground and flare into that. And that also brings up another good point is if you need to drop down into some bushes, pretty much a full flare is the only safe way. You need to dump all that energy so you can just parachute down into the grass. And boy, do I have a video for you. Let's see here. Where is it? I alluded to it earlier. But this is my real bush flying. So I was landing, I misjudged the approach, and I came up way short. And I was like, oh, great. So around out high, get ready, and full flare. And I still had some forward energy, but I bled off enough to land at least. So um, also, palms open, trying to have as little grip as possible, but I think it's also a situation where um, if you're trying to keep your palms open, but you're pinching, look, ma, no hands. This is the fact that you're pinching the bar, you're still putting weight on it. So it can be a little bit tough. Even with cupping, you have to still be conscious of that you're not putting any weight forward on the down tubes, causing the glider to rotate forward. Uh, let's see. And me said, isn't that so the base tube doesn't touch the grass? Catch on the grass? Yes. See earlier explanation. Literally, I flew into a bush. Comedy gold. All right. Let's continue on. There were some good ones in here that I wanted to show. Yeah, some exciting ones. Oh, another one where he's in a left-hand bank, he flares, and the wings, do the opposite. They kind of level themselves in the opposite direction. So um, it's not always a guarantee, but it can bring you back. I think did the glider start to yaw in that situation? I think he caught it just before the glider started to yaw into that turn. So the nose did kind of drop into that turn, but it didn't continue to coordinate into that turn. So again, it's a really uh, unusual thing that happens. I don't have a great explanation for it, but if you could flare wings not level before the yaw is initiated, then it seems to do kind of a reverse. Um, all right, a lot of people there, they're just getting slow too early. That's interesting here. Okay, here we got an expert. Look at that. Those feet are way back. Pop, a nice full flare landing. Nice. And Wolfie there with the high five. Whoa. So it didn't even look like the glider was turning at that point, but apparently it had some weight shift already energized into it, that it coordinated as soon as he stopped doing the weight shift. And that's kind of the thing about the weight shift control gliders. You can hold your weight over for a long time and nothing happens. And you're like, okay, I got to try this again. And as soon as you go back to centered, it just does what you have been trying to get it to do for the last, you know, 3 seconds, which felt like eternity. Um, so when you're trying to do weight shift corrections, especially down low, then little bumps, bump, come back, bump, come back. Um, and I'm only having my hands up here because it's the video. But I would say don't have your hands up high like this until you're ready to flare. Seriously. Um, RJ made a comment on that last video. Maybe they're pushing out more on the low wing as possible. Yeah, I can't tell everything that's going on in the video. So nice little slider. Whoa, missed it. Boop, boop, boop. That would have been a good situation. Maybe well, yeah, he kind of missed it there. But notice how his feet are just all the way back, and they keep getting further and further back. The closer he is getting to a flare, so he's basically prone. And had he just gotten a foot underneath him to hop and try and save himself a little bit, maybe prolong the landing a little bit more, that he would have gotten his hand back on the down tube and been able to execute a flare. I don't know, but yeah. Uh, Interesting too, the fact that he couldn't grab on with that hand. He rotated and the broadside of his body hit, um, not necessarily head first, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, nice little run. A little bit awkward, but that's okay. Whoa! You missed it and got onto the rear wires. That's funny. Rear wire landings are hard on high performance gliders. The sweep of the wires going back to the keel is really high. Uh, you need to be very, very upright to pull that off. All right, a little late. And notice how there, you know, as he's pushing, he flared late, and he probably was leaning onto it, but he kept the run up and was able to kind of push the glider up and out. Um, so he didn't have the nose touch. Whoa, what was that? Let's see. That one's kind of interesting. Notice that you can actually see when the glider settles, not by the nose pitching down, but how it descends over the that tall grass. So watch carefully how right when he starts to push out, it's just after the glider starts to drop below that grass. So in this case, it was a little bit late, from a full flare perspective, because if it was a perfect full flare, it would have come to a dead stop. So again, reinforcing that idea that the glider's starting to settle, that's the perfect time to flare. How do you know what that's happening? It's pretty subtle. Bar pressure, back of the hand. Got to be sensitive to that. Nice, nice crescendo flare. So notice, it looks like he's pulling in a lot. You can tell he's in a competition harness because, even though it looks like he's pulling in with all of his might, he doesn't seem to be going very fast because he's prone. And being prone on the down tubes, you've got such a limited range of motion. I mean, really, just put your hands up to your shoulder and see how far back you can pull before, your shoulder blades start hitting. It's pretty far versus low hands. You can go much further back. Um, so it kind of has a little pop there in the transition. And this is kind of a bad place to be. You just dumped a bunch of energy um, about 10 feet off the ground. If you were to get hit by a gust, a wind gradient right there, it could easily snowball into something worse. So when you're trying to do this kind of round out, or when you're approaching the ground, you need to make sure that you are not dumping your energy um, in inconvenient locations. Had he come in with one hand up, one hand down, and transitioned the last hand closer to trim, then he wouldn't have dumped all that energy. If he had transitioned with both hands up, well, he might not be able to pull in very much because he's in one of those sleek comp harnesses that you can't really get upright in. So maybe in that situation, you're better off just staying on the base tube until you can, quickly put both hands up and flare. But he's in a single surface glider, so he's got everything working against him. So he's probably in one of the harder configurations for an easy landing. We actually haven't seen the result of it. Let's see how if he pulls it off. I think he does. It gets a little sideways. Not the worst though. Kind of a two-step, he's feeling it out. And this is another technique that some people talk about is, kind of pumping the bar. It's just like, pump and then, let it back in and just, once you're ready to, dump all that energy, you just kind of feel it out until you're ready to just push out all the way with all your might. Um, it's sloppy. I don't like it. Maybe some people have made it work for them over the years. I think it leaves you with a lot of room for not really understanding what's going on with the glider. Free girls in your city. Well, that's what I get for making the chat public, but that's okay. Um, all right. Again, kind of, out of content, and I don't want this video to run on forever. So if you have any questions, I open the floor to all. Please let me know if you have any questions. Um, I think I'll probably start wrapping it up here. If you guys have any videos that you would like me to review, I also open up the floor at this time. And I'll give it a few minutes here if anybody wants to uh, share one of their videos that they'd like a critique on, or have an interesting landing that you're not quite sure why it went wrong, or anything of the like. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Um, I think I've covered enough in this video to kind of leave it at that. Maybe I'll do another round where I just, kind of have a little bit more candid, layback review of videos, just, a stream where we just talk about um, landings, we go through videos, we talk about, things that come up through it throughout the video. So I think it's a good time to end it. We've been going on for about 2 hours now. I think that's plenty of time. Um, I I kind of want to grow this channel. Do subscribe. It also helps me reach a goal so I can start accepting super thanks and super chats. That would be very cool if and very encouraging if I could get to that point someday. So um, again, uh, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate all of you guys that have stayed to the end. Um, if you think of any videos later on, or if you'd like me to cover another topic, then please send me a message with your video or your thoughts on the next topic, and I will do that. So until next time, safe landings. Um, I am also going to put in the chat a article by my instructor that is basically the foundation for my landings and this presentation. So I encourage all of you to go and read it and study it thoroughly because I think there's a lot of great information in there. Okay, just want to make sure that the chat latency is not messed up on my end. Okay. Thanks everybody. Uh, appreciate all the encouraging comments and look forward to next time. Bye for now.